And I would just like to ask Jen Beasley, who's co-chair of the On-Screen Manitoba Board, along with Madison Thomas, to just say a few words.
Thanks, Nicole. Sorry, I almost committed the cardinal sin of not unmuting myself before speaking. But thank you very much. And thanks, as Nicole said, to everybody for being here on behalf of my co-chair, Madison Thomas, and myself. As Nicole said, you show by being here that you continue to invest in the safety and the safe practices of our industry in Manitoba as we are ramping back up. Thanks so much to the team at OSM for updating the guide for this session. That guide is a living document. It's, just as we've progressed dealing with COVID in general as a society, the industry has progressed as well, and it constantly needs to be updated with safe practices. And thank you as well to Ellen Rutter, to Nicole Lowen, and to Dr. Rusk for joining us today. And I look forward to the session.
Thanks, Jen. Just a reminder that this session is being recorded so that we can share it with others who are unable to attend today. So I want to just take a moment now also to recognize that the COVID-19 Safety Guide was originally developed through the collaboration of many stakeholders. This included the On-Screen Manitoba Producer Committee and the Manitoba Media Production Industry Working Group. So the Industry Working Group includes all of the local media production industry stakeholders. And all of those groups are here today. And a couple of them would like to say a few words. But first, just let me recognize in, I believe, alphabetical order, I've got it here. So a thank you to ACTRA, to the City of Winnipeg Film and Events Office, to the DGC, to Film Training Manitoba, to IATSE 856, to Manitoba Film and Music, to the Manitoba Film Liaison, and of course, the team at On-Screen Manitoba, all of whom contributed to the collaborative effort that resulted in the guide, along with the On-Screen Manitoba Producer Committee that we've been using for the past few months. And I know that Melissa Capist, who's the Manitoba Film Liaison for the Department of Sport, Culture, Heritage, would just like to say a couple of words now. So I will turn the mic over to her.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole, and hello, everybody. I'm delighted to, say a few words on behalf of the government. Really just thanking all of you for your diligence through this pandemic. The province's #1 priority is the safety of all Manitobans. And you guys have really, done a great job. Your diligence and your commitment to safety has not gone unnoticed. So thank you for all of that. I'd also like to thank Nicole and the On-Screen Manitoba Board and the Working Group and the Producers Committee for tireless work in putting these protocols together that really have kept the industry safe. So to all of you, I'm really glad that we're able to get back to work and that we will do so safely. And again, much appreciate everything you've put into it. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. And thanks once again to all of the representatives from these groups that are here today. It really was a team effort, and we wouldn't be here with the safe industry that we have without your support. So I believe that now we're going to move on to our session for today. So it's my pleasure to welcome producer Ellen Rutter, who is our host for this session, along with nurse Nicole Lowen, who is also a COVID-19 supervisor. Many of you may have met her on set. And also to welcome Dr. Richard Rusk, who is a Preventive Medicine Specialist who's joining us today as well. So I will now hand it over to the panel, who will lead us through the rest of the session.
Thanks, Nicole. My name is Ellen Rutter, and I'm a local producer. I was a production manager here for about 30 years, so I know a lot of the players in town. And but there's always new people, and there's always new things springing up all the time. I have had the pleasure of working with Nicole Lowen and getting a chance to get to know Richard Rusk over the past couple of days. So I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and give you a bit of a background on who they are and where they come from. Nicole, let's start with you.
Yeah, so hi everybody, my name is Nicole Lowen. I am a registered nurse in Manitoba. I also have experience as a clinical educator. I moved here in the summer from Southern Ontario and was a clinical educator down there for home care for nurses and for healthcare aides. So COVID was a very well-known thing to me, dealing with a lot of COVID in people's homes, in the long-term care facilities down in Southern Ontario, because it hit really hard down there when I was working. And when I moved back here, I had the delight to work on Burden of Truth as a COVID supervisor. And since then, I've been able to kind of help in any way I can to teach others how to be a COVID supervisor, but also my interest lies in just helping crew understand a lot more about COVID and ways that they can reduce that risk of transmission.
Thank you. Richard?
Yes, well, good afternoon, everybody. And my special thanks to Nicole Mathian, who invited me here. I really appreciate the opportunity. So I am a physician, and actually I'm also a veterinarian, but that's besides the point. And I practiced here in Manitoba as the head of communicable diseases for the province, as the head medical officer of health. So I worked very, very closely with Dr. Brent Rusin, and I have managed outbreaks and pandemics. I managed the H1N1 pandemic and the Ebola scare panic that came. And my specialty is public health and prevention and preventative medicine. So all the management and all the science behind why are we doing these prevention methods, that's what I eat, sleep, breathe. I'd rather be reading a journal article about this sort of stuff than reading a novel. So hopefully by the end of this, I'll also be wanting to kind of watch documentaries and things like that. So.
Thank you, Richard. Okay, so before we get started with questions and answers for Richard and for Nicole, I'd like to explain some of the methods that we're going to follow today. OSM received many questions from many of you. They have aggregated them, grouped them for us, and then we went through and we tried to put them in order to lead us through a conversational style. So instead of just taking questions in the chat, we've taken what you've already sent us, and we're going to work our way through things step by step. Because we're here to talk about, one of the things we're here to talk about today are the OSM guidelines that have been published and the changes to them. I'm not going to walk you through the entire document because that would take hours. It's online. It's a very good and very easy read. Instead, I'm going to briefly, before we start our questions, I'm just going to read you a quick note about the changes that you should be aware of and why you should go back and reference that document again if you haven't looked at it for a couple of months. So there's a lot of housekeeping changes in the document, but it does update information based on what we know now as opposed to what we knew when the document first came out. So the key changes then that you should look out for are, it speaks to masks must be worn at all times, indoors and out, even with physical distancing in place. And that was added in July, but it wasn't really published. It was just in the document. And as has been mentioned already today, it is a living document. So it's important to go back and review it from time to time. There is some clarification that the document is for everyone attending a filming worksite. And what that means are employees, employers, any contractors, subjects and volunteers, or affiliated officials, anyone who would have had any cause to visit your place of work. There are recommendations for designating and hiring of a dedicated COVID safety workers. That's whether it's a supervisor, cleaners, etc., and the role of the safety committee. And as you should all know, there is by law a safety committee on most film productions, depending on size, determines what you have to have. That is separate from a COVID safety committee. So please read that. The explanation is very good. There is some clarification about when masks may be removed and the use of visors. There are notes to wash your hands with warm running water. And there are new links to Government of Canada approved disinfectants for cleaning. Those are also ever changing. So every time you get a new product, double check it against that website. So those are the basics of the changes. Again, please review them. The way we thought we would approach today is, I said, we took our questions, we put them in an order that we think will help to answer your questions and help you understand how to set yourself up and how to tackle problems that you might encounter. To that end, I'm going to start asking questions. And the first question, we're going to talk a fair bit about basics, just to make sure that everybody has a good grounding in what COVID is and the basics of what we should all be doing about it. So we're going to start with basics, and I'm going to start with Richard. So Richard, can you tell us, please, what is a virus, and specifically a coronavirus?
Sure. Okay. Well, thanks. So a virus is essentially a microorganism, very, very small. In medicine, we use the word pathogen, and it is essentially made up of a cell wall with genetic material in it, and that's it. It's incredibly simple, like organism. And our coronavirus is a group of viruses, and they are RNA viruses. So the genetic material only has one strand, not DNA, not two strands. And then actually, I'm just going to kind of carry on expanding a little bit. We've all seen pictures of this coronavirus. It's round, okay? And when it's a RNA virus, it's going to be slightly smaller than our DNA viruses generally. But we've seen the pictures, it's nice and round, and it has all these nice spikes in it. And these little spikes is where it got its name from, because it looks like a crown. And so corona crown. And the big difference between this coronavirus and influenza is, well, there's a few important differences. This coronavirus is completely new. It's novel. Whereas you think about it, influenza has been around for a long time. Although coronavirus itself has been around for a long time. It tends to be quite a common virus that kind of drifts back and forth. But the last big serious coronavirus was the SARS pandemic that we had. And so that was coronavirus 1, and now we coronavirus 2. And that's why if you'll see, and SARS stands for systemic acute respiratory syndrome, and potentially this coronavirus creates a similar type of disease as our SARS-1, where it is a virus that spreads. It's a respiratory virus, so it's spread from coughing, breathing, sneezing, anything like that. And the first place that it really gets into is the respiratory system. So that is where there are some similarities with the influenza virus compared to coronavirus, in that they're both respiratory. But the really important piece that we found in the pathology of coronavirus is that the SARS-2 enters through very specific receptor sites on our cells, and so they're called the ACE inhibitor receptor sites. Okay, people may have heard about that if you've had high blood pressure, things like that. But we have a lot of them in the back of our throat and in our hard palate. And so whereas with influenza, you actually have to get a lot of that virus even further down, deeper into your respiratory system, we can actually start to get absorption of this virus like pretty much from just behind your nose. And so that's part of the reason why we not only have a completely novel virus, so you don't have a whole lot of people that are immune to it. Actually, we now do, but in the beginning we didn't. And then obviously it gets absorbed a lot quicker. So the potential of this going over into severe disease is a lot higher. And so if we think back to a year ago, and there was all this discussion, oh yeah, this virus isn't as bad as flu. It doesn't cause deaths quite as badly. Well, if you look at the latest numbers as of today, we are still sitting at a 2% death rate. I mean, that means if everyone on this because we've got about 100 people on here, okay? So if everyone here on this call were to get infected, 2 of us would die. That's not like flu, okay? So this is definitely in many ways a much more serious virus than common the annual flu virus. So, sorry, I kind of rambled on there. But.
No, that's okay. So this coronavirus is actually SARS-2.
Mm-hmm.
It is called coronavirus 19 because it was first discovered in 2019. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And will it continue to be referred to as such, or will it become coronavirus 21 just because of variants?
Yeah, fantastic question. Most likely it will stay coronavirus 19, simply because you look at the nomenclature of most diseases, they'll go back to the beginning and they'll keep that name. There may be new names that come out specifically to variants, and we already have that in a way, but the reality is there are a lot of variants. I guarantee you there will be a lot more variants. There are actually a lot of variants within the influenzas as well. And if you think about it, we had H1N1, that was a pandemic, but we were also very worried about an H5N1. And so variants within viruses happen on a regular basis. And some variants are a little bit more worrisome. The variants that we are kind of worried about at the moment are like there's the British variant and the Brazilian variant and the South African variant. The main issue with those is they tend to be more infective. So suddenly, instead of one person infecting 2 people, they might infect 3. And so just mathematically, that means it spreads faster. Well, then one of those 3 or one of those 100 that it ends up spreading to could be more susceptible. And therefore, just mathematically, you could get a higher death rate. But the reality is we know we're going to have more variants. And so that's why it's sticking with Corona 19 is most likely what's going to happen. And if we were to just go back to the basics and follow our basic principles, which you all know, we all have known right from the beginning of this, and but we follow those basics, we will actually be able to combat this. The reality is, it's pretty hard to be wearing a mask all the time, washing your hands constantly, and you you tend to forget.
Just keep it out of you, right?
Yeah.
So then how is, if we're going to start talking about how to keep it out of us, how is the virus transmitted?
Yeah, so as I explained in the beginning, I mean, it's a respiratory virus. It gets in quickly, and then so with all viruses, you'll get an exposure point, and then you aren't actually sick for a certain amount of time period, and it could be potentially all the way up to 14 days with coronavirus, but it could be within 3 days. Okay. But that's part of the reason why we have regulations around 14 days. And in that time period, before you're actually sick and you start coughing and sneezing and whatnot, it's called the incubation period. Okay. And then once you've moved on over past the incubation period and you're actually infective, then you start sneezing and coughing. And even if you're singing or shouting, when we do that, we let out a lot of air, and the majority of that air will come from even the upper respiratory, and so those little droplets can have viral particles in them. And so on average, there's some cool numbers here. On average, there's up to 3,000 viral particles per droplet that comes out. I mean, obviously it depends on how sick you are and that sort of stuff. And in the theory is that you probably need around about 1,000 viral particles that you absorb before you will now start incubating. So you think about it, it's pretty easy to actually pass it on. Yes. And
so
but it's all through the droplets are spread. They're small little water or micro droplets, but they aren't. There's lots of discussion about, do you aerosolize these? In other words, are they even smaller droplets? And the bulk of the evidence shows it has remained predominantly droplet spread. Okay, and so therefore those droplets have a certain size, and they will only, like physically and from the pure physics of it, gravity will suck them down within two meters. And so that is the whole piece about physical distancing. You might cough, but they are heavy enough to go down to a lower level. They're not going to be sitting at this level where around us, where we most likely will breathe them in.
Right. So they're not floating in the air. And if you and I are 6.5 feet apart and you sneeze, I'm probably fine.
Probably going to be far enough. Yes.
And
there's lots of studies that kind of blur those edges, but for the bulk, for the 80-20, for the 80% of scenarios, that's what it is.
Right. And if those droplets fall and they fall onto a thing and I touch the thing, I have to clean myself and clean the thing. Would that be
yes?
Wise?
Yes, and there is literature and experiments that they did on that, and how long will these droplets now sit, and how long will these viral particles actually be viable on that surface. And compared to a year ago to now, the experiments haven't necessarily changed. We still know that if the viral particles sit on stainless steel, they can potentially last like 5 days. Okay, but we haven't seen the epidemiological evidence of that. Yeah. So it's very interesting in that the bench science or the lab science doesn't quite turn into real world science. But my question is that because we cleaning like stink? We're just cleaning everything? And so maybe that's part of it. So we're actually looking after ourselves by doing the cleaning.
Right. So the smart thing is just keep cleaning.
I think so, yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Richard. Let's just move on to another take on the basics, and let's talk to Nicole about hygiene. So Nicole, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. So first, I kind of want to just go off of what Richard was saying, because he kind of went in with physical distancing. And I know it can get very overwhelming with a lot of the different rules, and do we do this, and when do we do this, and at what time, and all of that, and it gets to be a lot. And so one thing that when we were talking about putting this together was that we just wanted everyone at the end to have some core concept of what to look out for. And based off of these core concepts, then that can help you with what department you're working on. It allows you to look at what questions you should be asking yourself, your department, maybe even your production, what you should be mindful of. It's a place where you can start for all those questions. Because I know we did get some where they were specific on, well, if, in this department, what should I do? Or if I'm doing this, should I be following these, or should I be doing something different? So the ones that I'm going to list are ones that are basic concepts that you can use for reducing the transmission of COVID, whether you're on set, whether you're at home, if you're a big production, if you're a low production, if you're a documentary. And so these 5 core concepts are, like Richard mentioned, are physical distancing, right? So that's could be our spacing between how close we're standing to each other, right? I know with filming, there are times where that isn't as possible. And so then it's, okay, so what is the best situation of that? If we have to be close, what's the shortest period of time that we need to be close? If we absolutely have to, and there's no way of getting around moving and finding space between. And then there's also physical distancing with our zones. And I know zones came up in one of the questions with, if I'm a lower budget, how do I do zones? And zones is, doesn't cost anything, because it's essentially how you're splitting up your set. And depending on what works for your production, one thing that worked on the production that I was a COVID supervisor on was that we had essentially our 3 zones. And our first one was where our actors were, which was the smallest zone, because that's their zone that is at the most at risk, right? We have actors who are unmasked. So that's where more of our PPE is, and that's where we're wanting less people. And then the next zone, and then, are people who still need to maybe come in and out, but they're only coming in and out when the cameras are not rolling, when everyone has their PPE on. So meaning the actors have their PPE on. And then our third are anyone else in the outside, right? People who maybe need to stay at circus, anything like that. And so the reason for this is you're going, ultimately, who needs to be here when that camera is rolling? Because if you don't have a role in this area while that camera is rolling, then essentially you don't need to be in this space, thusly reducing the amount of bodies, allowing you to have more of that ability to physically distance. The other big one too is our hand hygiene. So this one is really, really important, because that's where you're going to break that chain of transmission. If someone's touching their mask and then touching the doorknob, you can't control. I mean, you can try, but and I know you can't really control what other people are doing, but you can control what you do. And the biggest part with a lot of these is feeling empowered that you are the best protection for yourself. So if you're touching that doorknob that someone just picked their nose and touched, that's okay. I could have COVID on my hand right now from touching that, let's say. But as long as I go and I wash my hands after, right, I'm breaking that chain of transmission. If I touch it after someone's picked their nose and then I'm like scratching my eye, or I lift my mask up to, pick something out of my mouth, then increasing my risk, right? So that hand hygiene is really, really important. If you have the ability to use warm soap, water to hand wash, that is the staple. If you don't have access to that, then hand sanitizer is also effective. But again, I would avoid using only hand sanitizer if you do have the option of using soap and water, because like Richard was mentioning with the coronavirus and that shell, it actually has a membrane. And so when you're using these items, especially with the soap and water, that soap breaks down that membrane, which is what kills that virus, right? So that's why it's really, really important. The other thing too with our hand washing is that when you're rinsing your hands under the water, it's that friction of the water that helps also to remove those contaminants. Also, when you're washing your hands or when you're sanitizing your hands, if your hands are visibly dirty and you use hand sanitizer, it is not going to be as effective because it can't get down to your hand, right? It's like for any crew members, I'm going to do my best to use an analogy here. It's like if I have makeup on my face and I put my wrinkle cream on top, that's not going to do anything for my face because I just put it on top of my makeup. I have to wash my face and then put my wrinkle cream on, right? This might be a stretch. I'm going to try really hard here. It's like if I'm a grip and I'm putting a gel on a window, I could be totally off here, but I'm going with it. That gel's not going to stick very well if that window is dirty, right? I have to clean that window, put on my solution, and then put my gel on the window. Anyone can comment after if I'm totally off on that. But the idea is that you want that clean surface in order for that hand sanitizer to work. And that's why too, if you have the ability to have hand wash stations available, if you are using the hand sanitizer, sometimes depending on the hand sanitizers you use, they do create a little bit of a buildup. So it is good to periodically, if you have the opportunity, to just give your hands a good wash to help get some of that residual cream, because some of them have like an aloe in it that you can feel on your hands. Another concept is staying home when you or a household member are sick, ill, symptomatic, okay? Really important, again, if you are, even if you're feeling weird or off, don't say, oh, well, it'll be, once I drive, it'll be fine, right? Just if you have that feeling, stay home, because it's best that 12 hours later you feel fine and then you can go in. But it's in those things because we have our standard symptoms that we're looking at that are common, but everyone reacts differently as well. And some people too might have some symptoms or off feelings one day, but then the next day they don't have full symptoms. So trying to catch where that start is. But then also too, if anyone in your home is sick, please don't go to work. If you're not feeling sick, that's fine. But if someone's in your house is sick, stay home, right? Have them get tested to find out. And then wearing your mask is important. Richard was saying, right, the biggest way that we're spreading is person to person through those droplets. And so when you're wearing a mask, you're keeping your germs to yourself because we don't want to be sharing our saliva. And then when other people wear their mask, then they're keeping their germs to them. They're not putting their germs on the outside of your mask. And then reducing contact. So this here again, right, when you're having those zones, you're having less people in that area, which means less touching of surfaces. This is also reducing contact that you have on yourself, right? Reducing how much you are touching your mask. I know a lot of people are like, when can I take my mask off? And I totally get it. Wearing a mask is annoying and we need our breaks. But the idea with your PPE is if you can leave it on, again, as long as it's not dirty, soiled, or difficult to breathe through where you would need to change it. But the more that you're touching your PPE, or the more that you're, taking it on and putting it back on, or donning and doffing it, just increases that exposure risk for transmission. And this also to extend, I know there was a question about background. And so how these tie into what you do on set and in your departments, you can look at, okay, we have background. What about doing their hair, their makeup, their wardrobe? We'll look at these, right? And say, okay, well, do I need to do their makeup? What is the scene? Am I going to actually notice what their eyeliner looks like? If they're just going to be a blurry blob, or potentially be a blurry blob, then do you need to be doing makeup on your background actors? A lot of this change is being creative and taking the time in prep, sending out to background actors or to the background casting to send out to the background, what do you want their wardrobe? How do you want their makeup? Getting that all sent to them so they know, so that they can prepare. Again, a lot of this is going to be dependent on your production and what your production wants, but it's starting points where you can bring up, right? Yeah.
Okay, so I have a couple of questions, Nicole. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So from what you've said, this is things that I heard you tell me if I'm right or wrong. The best way to protect ourselves personally is to keep a distance from when we can, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And therefore, besides keeping the 6.5 feet or 2 meters apart, keep your groups small and as apart as you can make them, right? Don't bring people you don't need. So if you don't need 100 background, don't bring 100 background. And if you don't have to touch them, don't touch them. Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah.
As for the best way to look after ourselves is to exercise good personal hygiene and PPE protection. So for hygiene, it really comes down to hand washing, no face touching. Correct? Everybody agree?
Exactly. Because when we're touching our face, like Richard mentioned, right, those are our entry points.
Right.
So if we're touching our face, if we're, wiping our nose like this, what Richard mentioned is it's quick for that transmission.
No time to spare, right? It's like it's there already.
Yeah, right. So, even not washing your hands and moving your nose like this, right, puts you at increased risk. So reducing the amount that you are touching your face. And if you really, really, really need to, wash your hands, touch whatever you need to touch, and then wash your hands again.
Should I wash my face?
Should you wash?
Touching my face?
No, you need to wash your hands.
I just wash my hands. Okay.
Hands, yes.
Okay. So then that brings us to PPE. And what is it? So masks. Do we wear goggles? Do we wear face shields? Do we wear gloves? And why? What are each of those doing?
Yeah, so your mask, yes, you wear, because your mask is what protects you, but also protects other people from your droplets, your saliva, your spit, your germs. The goggles and the face shield is an extension of reducing that risk of transmission. Okay. One thing I heard that I chuckled on set was with the goggles, and my eyes, I still have a twitch whenever I say goggles. Was that a crew member mentioned, why am I wearing these? It's not like my eye juice is going to jump out and infect anyone. And I'm like, no, your eye juice isn't jumping out. But if someone's coming up to you, the masks aren't 100% filtration. But secondly, and this is especially too, if you do any outdoor filming, you have the public as well. And so if someone's coming up to you from the public saying, oh, hey, what are you guys filming? And they're not wearing a mask, it's not as common now, but definitely in the summer, fall, when I was working as a COVID supervisor, it was more common for people to not wear masks as often in the public. Your eyes, which are an entry point, are exposed to their droplets. So by wearing the goggles and by wearing the face shield, that protects you.
Okay.
That's an added protection for you. The face shield protects the outside of your mask, so that anyone who doesn't have a mask, you primarily see this with people who are in that main zone, who are, around actors who don't have their mask on. They will have the shields to protect the outside of their mask, so that if they are coming within that 2 meters of an actor who's unmasked, the outside of their mask is protected and doesn't get any of their droplets on the outside of it.
Okay. So the masks protect people from me. The goggles protect me from other people, and the shield protects all of my things that I'm wearing, right?
Mhm.
So the way things can get into me are my eyes, my nose, my mouth, anything about my ears?
I don't think your ears know. It's like they're called your mucous membranes.
Right. So it's where my stuff connects in my breathing part of my face. Is that correct?
Well, that's the part that should only be exposed in public.
Okay, there you go. Do people need to wear gloves?
So I have people should be wearing gloves when they are using any of the cleaners. And then gloves should also be for, blood or bodily fluids. The thing with gloves is that what ends up happening is that people use it as a replacement. And so what happens is that people will put gloves on and touch stuff, but then they will still touch their face.
Because they think they've protected their hands.
Yeah, and so if you're just touching, your day-to-day things, it's not a replacement for washing your hands.
Okay.
Right? If you take off these gloves, you still have to wash your hands after you take your gloves off. What you're touching with your gloves, unless it's cleaner, which is erosive to your skin, blood, bodily fluids, which cause an exposure risk to you. Touching your day-to-day objects, gloves or hands, as long as you're doing your hand hygiene with your normal hands, that's how you're protecting yourself with that contact.
So use gloves for what you would normally use gloves for, and it doesn't replace hand washing and cleaning surfaces. Fair? Okay.
Yeah.
One last question about PPE.
Mm.
A lot of people ask, can they use cotton masks or bring their own? And we're understanding that I'm talking about the workplace now. Okay, not what you do at grandma's, although it might be the same, I don't know. But could you give us a brief explanation of why we would use 3-ply or KN95 or something like that over
Yeah,
I can. Am I wrong?
Yeah, I can start. And I think that, Richard, by all means, hop in, because you would have a bit more breadth of knowledge on this. But the thing with the masks is it is dependent on that filtration level, right? And so if you have a reusable mask or like a cotton mask, then you get into how many layers does that mask have? Is it a single layer? Is it 2-layer? Is it 3-layer? The more layers you have, the more protection or more filtration that you have. One of the issues with the reusable masks, and one of the reasons why I'll say we didn't use it on the production that I was on, was because it's really difficult to find a reusable mask that fits a lot of people. And what ends up happening is that people touch their mask more because it moves around. Going from outside, especially in the cold weather, the reusable masks get wet faster with your humid breath. And so then you're also risking, are people changing their masks frequently enough? With the, I'm losing my train of thought here. Yes, surgical masks, right? Those protect with your droplets, and they provide more of a filtration. They are also, what's the word? Provide more of like a moisture barrier on the outside of your mask, which just helps prevent any droplets from outside going through what you're breathing in. And then when you have your N95 masks, with those are more for your aerosols, because they're going to protect those fine droplets. So in this situation, unless you are doing something that's going to be aerosolizing those droplets for someone who's infected or who is COVID positive, it's not, and again, I mean, Richard, please hop in after I say this, but it's not for your day-to-day onset where you have droplet, it's not as necessary over a surgical mask, right? Your N95 should be, and I'm very passionate about this and using appropriate PPE for what you're doing, because I've been part of a shortage for nurses and healthcare aides. I've had to hand out ketchup packets of hand sanitizer to nurses because hand sanitizer was so hard to get. So for me, I'm very passionate about using the appropriate PPE for what you need. The other thing too with the N95 mask is that you need to be fit tested for them to actually be what they're supposed to be used for. So we would not wear the same N95 mask. And because it's for the aerosolized, that's really their primary purpose, having the fit is what's going to give you that seal. So those aerosolized contaminants don't go in and through.
Okay. Richard, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, it's also very hard to actually wear an N95 correctly for the whole day.
Mm-hmm.
And so we find that number one, it's wastage. And then number two, it didn't actually help because people found, oh no, this is really frustrating me, and they pull it down and they're moving it all the time. No. It's supposed to be fitted correctly. Once it's on, you leave it be. And so you're no further ahead. If not, you may even be behind, as if you had just said, fine, I'll rather just use a surgical mask because I feel I'm a little bit more at risk or something like that. And so our recommendation is there's next to no reason, unless you are putting something down someone's throat that you know is infected, there's no real reason to be using an N95. And maybe on production we might be in that setting, but it's
no, that's why we asked. So your recommendation also would be the 3-ply?
Yes, yeah.
Over or homemade?
Well, exactly. And you can get really nice surgical masks now at a very acceptable price. And you're then using the best quality of PPE compared to the cloth masks. You can also get great cloth masks that people have made with a special little piece of wire in here, so that's good. But then it goes to that 3-ply piece, and if you want to wear something to protect yourself, well, use the right stuff. And so that's why we've moved to 3-ply, because we want to make sure it's effective. But definitely, if you're using the surgical mask, it's going to be effective. So.
Okay, great. So Richard, now let's move on to cleaning. And could you tell us what you feel we should be cleaning around us? So once we've talked about cleaning ourselves, what do we clean around us?
So the top three things are glass surfaces, plastic surfaces, and steel, for sure. And cleaning that on a regular basis. And I know in other industries that I've worked in, they'll actually employ somebody that's just an additional cleaner for the office, that sort of stuff, and they just walk through 3 or 4 times a day, especially during high traffic, just after high traffic periods, things like that. And then they go to high traffic surfaces, so washrooms, kitchens, and places where those surfaces are. So definitely there's real validity in doing that. Yes, it's an additional expense, and some people say, well, is it really going to prevent? As I had alluded to earlier on, it's probably not as important as a mask, in all honesty, but if it's 5% that it's preventing, well, why are we not doing that? Okay. But those 3 surfaces are the important ones. Just because that virus, then it has the ability to stay viable for a long time period. However, obviously it depends, are you outside, are you inside, which is it? It's a big surface or it's a handle, and so everyone is touching that same handle. Well, yes, but if it's a whole kitchen table, well, maybe, but the likelihood, so at least once or twice a day getting that clean. And then other things like environmental factors. So if it's exposed to direct sunlight, well, then that's actually a good thing. So you've got that UV, or it's in a high temperature area. Yes, that's also good. But inside, generally, we have kind of stable temperatures, so that it requires some form of cleaning then to keep the virus burden down to a level where it's unlikely that you touch it, not wash your hands beforehand, and then you're touching your eye or your nose or something like that. Yeah.
Okay, so glass, metal, and what was the third one?
And plastic.
And plastic. So a lot of the
Yes.
things that we use in our workplace
Yeah.
made of exactly
Yes.
the materials.
Exactly.
Glass,
Yeah.
metal,
Yeah.
and plastic. And door
Yeah, and
right?
Yeah. Exactly. So your high traffic. Yeah. I know in the beginning, everyone was, well, what about clothing? What about wood? Things like that. Well, it's more porous. So these small viral particles potentially can kind of, they're not absorbed, but they just into the porous material. So you're not going to have all of the virus sitting right on the surface. And I mean, like you say, plastic, glass, and metal are the most common surfaces that we tend to touch. It's our equipment and that sort of stuff.
Those are the tools that we work with, the equipment that we work with, and what our common touch areas are, like door handles and washrooms and stuff. If I say to you, we understand where to clean common touch surfaces, but really, do we have to clean the door handles going into a washroom if the notion is that we're going to wash our hands after we use the toilet anyway? See, I would argue the answer is yes, because if you don't clean these door handles, but you do clean those, how's anybody going to know? The idea is forming habits. Would you agree?
Right. So it's part of that, and the bulk of us will wash our hands, but we only need a small portion of people to not, and then that surface is contaminated for everybody.
Right.
So
Okay.
it's kind of a little bit of a social responsibility thing here.
Right. Yeah. Okay, Nicole, let's apply some of this to film production for the minute. If we talk about you know, what things should we be using cleaning personnel, and what should maybe our departments be cleaning themselves, or what should individuals be cleaning themselves?
So my suggestion would be take COVID out of it.
Mhm.
Who normally would clean certain items? Because that should all stay the same, right? And typically that is all department specific, right? Grips clean the grip equipment, lighting cleans the lighting equipment, right? We shouldn't have someone going around and cleaning all the equipment, because then that's someone touching this department stuff and this department stuff and this department stuff and this department stuff. So each department should be responsible for cleaning their equipment and touching their equipment and all of that. Individuals should also be in charge of their individual items as well. One thing that was really great that we did on Burden of Truth was that in the lunchroom, when you were done, you would tip your chair up to signify that you ate lunch there. And that was important and an individual responsibility, so that no one was going there and eating there. And also so that one of the COVID cleaners knew that they had to go and wipe down that area. The COVID cleaners, if you do have one, should be in charge of cleaning what's above that. So what is different or what's changed since pre-COVID. And so a lot of that are those high touch areas or those highly used areas, right? So it's going and it's wiping down that door handle, every once in a while. It's going, doing rounds for any areas that people are touching, right? Doors, if they have to go in and out of a door for the zones, wiping that down. Handles, railings, anything like that. Bathrooms, so doing more frequent bathroom rounds of wiping everything down inside the bathroom. Just those extras that you wouldn't normally be doing.
Things that might otherwise be cleaned once a week by janitors, for instance, or a couple evenings a week, you would do every day now, several times a day, because now we are aware. Is that fair?
Yeah, providing that those are ones that are frequently used by multiple crew.
Because up until now, we didn't pay very much attention to it. If something was physically dirty, someone would clean it. The washrooms, of course, were cleaned several times a day. And now we are more aware that if I use it, somebody else probably uses it, and it probably should be cleaned more frequently. Just while we're talking about cleaning a crew and who cleans what, let's maybe use an example here, because people want to know what to do for specific departments, which we cannot do because people have to kind of figure out how they're going to do their own work. But this is a good place for an example about cleaning things that go between departments. Okay, so for instance, if I'm a props person or a costume person or hair and makeup person, and I have to either touch or hand something to an actor, do you see what I mean? I'm going from one department to the next. So I'm taking my pen and I'm giving it to Richard, who's going to act right now. And what should I be thinking about?
So a big part would again go back to that hand hygiene, right? Your 5 core hand hygiene. So if I'm touching something that I'm giving you, I want to make sure that my hands are clean. I've sanitized, right? Picked up this clean item and handed it to you. The other part too is going to another one with the, number 5 on our core concepts would be reduced contact. So do you have to reset that prop every time? Can the actor reset that prop? Because if they can go that whole scene only touching, and you just need to touch it to give it to them, and then you need to touch it to take it at the end of the day, then you're only touching it 2 times instead of maybe 20 times, right? If you're having to go and reset it and all of that. So again, it's going back to that creative part in how can I reduce how many times I'm touching someone else's stuff.
And how many people touch somebody else's stuff.
Exactly.
So I'm the person who's going to hand Richard the pen, and Richard's going to do his own resetting throughout the scene. and then he should give back to me. He shouldn't give it to you to remember to put away and put it back in the thing. That's
Mhm.
the same
Yeah,
with hair, makeup, and wardrobe. Richard gets into his costume, but the person touching him for final touches, either his clothing or his hair, should be the same person, not 3 or 4 different people touching him. Is that correct?
well, I think like whoever is the hair person is, that person. If they're, again,
If it's
let's think
necessary.
about a smaller budget, and
Mhm.
let's say you don't have as many people, then if I'm having to do your hair, Ellen, and then I have to go and do Richard's hair, then I'll, sanitize, do your hair or touch, your makeup, whatever I'm doing, and then I'll sanitize and then go to Richard and do Richard. So making sure that if I'm going between people, I'm, again, that hand hygiene, I'm sanitizing my hands or hand washing or whatever you have access to in between people.
Okay, great. Thank you. Richard, anything to add?
Oh no, you're muted.
You're muted.
There we go. Found it. Yeah, no, that's good. Practical tips. Yeah, no, that's perfect.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about eating, because in film production, whether you're on a large drama, a series, a feature, whether you're documentary or you're doing commercials, for instance, you most likely have an obligation to feed your cast and crew. So I just wanted to talk about that a little bit, because over this past year, we've gone to individually wrapped portions or meals. No craft service table. Things have to be wrapped or handed to you as an individual. There's no buffet tables or self-serve. Do you still agree at this time that those are the things that we should be doing? Let's start with Nicole. And do we see any let up of that in any way, shape, or form?
I think for now, I think it's going to continue to be individually wrapped. We do know that there is low transmission when it comes to food itself, but it's what does that all entail, getting that food, not the food. And so when we're looking at, buffet, you're going in, you're all touching the same utensils, right? So if I pick my nose and then grab the, spoon and dish myself up some ravioli, and then Richard comes and grabs that spoon and then, scratches his eye. So it's reducing, again, going back to the core 5, it's reducing how much everyone's touching one object. So by taking buffet away, we're reducing how much we're touching the same utensils. But then it's also the lineups as well, right? So by having it individually wrapped, you're able to have that line flow a lot faster than if I'm like, oh, am I gonna have spaghetti or ravioli? I don't know, maybe I'll have both. And right, you're holding up the line and now everyone's all waiting. And as much as we like to say that we, distance and keep our 2 meters, I mean, we've all seen lines everywhere. We are awful at maintaining that, even in our best intentions. So by having the prepackaged meals, it's quick, it's one person, handing and going through.
Okay. Now, Richard, something we were talking about just before the meeting started today, I was saying that we in general have an obligation to feed our cast and crew, but sometimes they get sick of it and they prefer to go out or like to have barbecues or something at set. And I, for one, and many of us have greatly discouraged that because we don't know where people go at lunch and we don't know who they might be in contact with. What do you think of that notion? Am I over worrying, or am I right to try and control the situation?
Yeah, I mean, so it's very difficult, because I mean, does an employer have that sort of power? But at the end of the day, as the employer, it's your obligation to create that safe environment. And as Nicole was saying, there's a few factors. I mean, I actually think the biggest factor of with food and feeding people and that sort of stuff is not the food and maybe not even the utensils. It's the fact that you have really congregated people. Okay. Yeah. And so then you say, okay, well, fine, let them go off site, but then they're exposed to even more people outside of this work pod. So you've created, so I try and look at a workplace in that if you can create a secure perimeter and then work within that secure perimeter, at least when you're inside there, you know that you're minimizing that risk to each other and you're responsible to each other, that sort of stuff. So you then go out for lunch. Well, now you've broken that perimeter, and who knows who you're exposed to when you go and get a quick pizza, and it might not be any fault of your own, but you want to still keep that risk contained so that at the end of the day, everyone on set and everyone in that workspace is as safe as possible. So I'm bringing your own lunch, fantastic. So if you're sick of the supplied lunch, well,
there you go. Do it that way.
Things like that, yeah.
Okay, so let's move on. And Richard, while you're speaking, let's start our conversation about monitoring and testing. What tests exist, what's the difference, and why we contract trace. Would you mind starting, please? I'm listening, but I'm getting confused.
Yeah, sure. And cut me off. And this is one of my pet subjects because it's technically and scientifically it's pretty cool. But so I break it down into you've got two types of tests that are readily available. Everyone's heard of a PCR test. And then an antigen test, okay? And so I'll get into that. And then you've got a rapid test and you've got a lab test. And so your PCR test, which is actually a very specific test that goes and looks for the actual genetic material from COVID, okay? So that PCR test is the most accurate, okay? And so there's, it depends how secure you're trying to create that environment, okay? And so I know with monitoring, there's some company that say, fine, we're gonna test everybody before they come in. The simple reality is, unless you have gobs of money, you're not going to be able to use a PCR. So then you end up using an antigen test. The problem with using an antigen test is it's not looking for the genetic material, so it's not nearly as accurate as that PCR. So sure, it might be cheaper, and it may even be faster because a lot of the antigen tests are actually these rapid tests. So within 5 to 15 minutes, you've got a result. But it's not going to give you that 95, 98% accuracy. So that's part of the difference. And then if you are testing people every single day, well, the bulk of your people that you're testing are actually, well, you would actually hope that everybody is actually asymptomatic, and people would have screened themselves out. As Nicole said earlier on, if you're feeling sick, do not come to work. It's as simple as that. And so if you're testing people every single day, you're testing these asymptomatics. Well, the downside then is if you are using an antigen test, which is looking for the actual virus, the whole virus, and a protein on the surface of that virus, if they're asymptomatic, they may not have enough virus that they're producing to create a positive test. So then you're using this more inaccurate test. So there's a lot of nuances
to go, yeah.
around types of testing and who you should be testing and how you do monitoring. And so I usually say, very, very sadly, it boils down to two things: money, because if you've got lots of money, sure, you like the Jets, for instance. So NHL, they test with a PCR test up their nose. These guys be scratching the back of their eye every single day. Before they get on the ice, they've already been tested with a PCR test. Okay, so there are rapid PCR tests that you can actually get within a few hours, compared to if you were to send them off to the provincial lab, which will probably take 24 to 48 hours. Okay. And just as accurate, but they cost a lot of money. So it boils down to money, okay? And then the other thing, it boils down to risk. And if doing testing is about risk mitigation, and so if you're using those other principles and being really diligent about those other principles that Nicole has talked about, you've already reduced your risk mitigation, has already been controlled to actually a very good level. It's not 100%, but it's probably at that 80-20 level.
Right.
And so this is it. So if you want to take it to that next level, you suddenly have to start spending more money. And so then everyone says, okay, well, I'm going to use a cheaper test, but the problem is you have to test more frequently, and it's still not necessarily at that 98, 95% accuracy.
Okay, well, you brought
That's
up
just
really,
about testing it.
some really good points there. So this is a good point, a good time for me to mention too, that with the guidelines that OSM has provided, and some of the questions that have come in is who's making these rules and why are things different on different shows? Well, let's do a quick recap. The first rules that we all follow are the laws, provincial laws. And then the province also sets out some recommended guidelines. Beyond that, you have something like local industry guidelines. That's what the OSM booklet is all about. Those are industry guidelines that we have developed within the industry. But beyond that, there are individual companies who, as Richard said, must assess their risk tolerance and their money available for such things. And they might require much more testing. A good example might be an American network or streamer show like Netflix or something like that, who have SAG or American Union actors on them. And they've come to agreements where they require much more testing than, for instance, a Canadian production. Doesn't mean a Canadian production wouldn't do it. It just means that each company is going to have to make rules based on what they and their related parties require. Okay, so if you're on a bigger show with a lot of American actors, you're going to test a great deal for several reasons. You brought foreign workers across that border, you have people in closer contact, and you have a great deal more money at risk, and you might have more money available. If you're on a smaller show or Canadian show, you might be doing far less testing. You might even be on a show that doesn't test at all unless there are symptomatic persons. Okay. Now, Nicole, instead of getting you to go through a whole stuff here, could you do two things, please? Could you just quickly run us through in the morning what a crew member or cast member would do on a daily basis? I'll give you an example. They would take the screener, right? That is either the provincial screener or one that the company has developed based on the provincial screener. Mm-hmm. You would do temperature checks. Is that correct?
Yeah.
You might take attendance in some way, shape, or form. Would those be correct?
Yeah. So what we've done. So first off, it's important that when you're taking your screener, you're taking it at home, not in the parking lot outside of set. So you're taking the screener at home, and you're taking it as close as possible to when you're leaving. That way it's the most accurate, true how you're feeling. And the reason why I say that is because a lot can happen between when you go to bed at night and when you wake up in the morning. And you also want to give your body some time in the morning to see what its true state is. And by this, I mean, you know, sometimes you wake up in the morning, and if you take it as soon as you, your screener, as soon as you wake up, yeah, you might have a little bit of, you know, muscle soreness, or you might feel like, oh yeah, no, my throat does feel a little bit, you know, scratchy or sore, right? But you need to look at the other factors, and maybe you were snoring last night. You know, maybe you were sleeping funny. So by giving yourself that time, you know, right before you do go to work, it allows you to know, okay, no, my throat is still feeling sore. So yeah, that's definite, right? At least gives you some time for your body to kind of, you know, figure itself out in the morning. So we do that screener, and the screener, if you do have your own screener, it's important that you have those questions match as true as possible to the screening tool that is approved by the province of Manitoba. One thing that I've done with the screener that we had in the last production was I just added a couple extra questions that pertain to film. One example was for people who have worked on any other productions. And so this didn't flag you as a, you know, fail, but it was just for me to be aware of, just for contact, if, you know, anyone's been on a different production and that production's had an outbreak, then I at least know, oh, okay, this background was on that 20 days ago, where, you know, and they are all asymptomatic, we're good, right? Or if there's that outbreak and someone's been on set and they were just on that, then, right, we can kind of check in with that. So it just helps with that contact tracing. And then, yeah, so they show up. We had hand wash stations just so we knew everyone was washing their hands, just a good, you know, straight off the bat. And then they had their temperature check. They had to show their pass. And then they got a wristband. And a reason why this was important was that it was a visual for everyone on set to know that that person has gone through the check-in and they passed their screener. And it was a way too for crew, because so much of it, yes, you have your COVID team, but it has to be collaborative and not just the crew and the COVID team, right? Like you have to work together. And so it was a way for, if crew saw that no one had a wristband, then they go, oh, hey, I saw this person doesn't have a wristband, just letting you know, right? And then we can see, okay, what happened? How did they get on set? So the idea is that no one's on set until they have that wristband on. Through the online screener we had, that's the way that we were able to keep attendance, because it date stamped everything. So I can go back a day, 3 days, a month, a week. I can go back to whatever time I want to see who was on set at that time or who was in the office at that time for contact tracing. But then we also marked it with attendance, so that on the call sheet, we just marked off, so that if anyone was supposed to be on the call sheet and their call times passed and they didn't check in, then we had a messaging system between our team, and then someone who was on set would go and find that person and check them in, because maybe they didn't get the right information, or, you know, they walked to set and didn't park at crew park, anything like that. And we also tried our best to maintain a single entry point. There's only a couple times where we had to have multiple ones for situations, but for the most part, we kept it to that single entry point, so that we weren't trying to figure out, you know, who's checked in where. It was a lot easier to navigate that.
And a big part of taking attendance is the ability to facilitate contact tracing. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. So let's say everyone on set who's supposed to be on the call sheet was all asymptomatic, all good. Great, fantastic. The next day, I get a phone call from someone and they have a cough and a sore throat. So then they'll go for testing. If their testing comes back positive, even though they were asymptomatic on set yesterday, we go back 48 hours. So now I can go back and see, was that person on set for the last 2 days? Okay, they were only on set, 3 days ago or 4 days ago, or they were only on set yesterday. Then I can see who was on set at that time. And then we go through the contact tracing. So we go through, who have you been within 2 meters for more than 15 minutes? Did you have masks on? Did you not? Right. And we go through a whole series of questions, and then, contacting them, and then asking them how they're feeling, so on and so forth. So it's a whole big thing, but it allows you to know who's there and who you have to be mindful of as well with their symptoms. And then for anyone who isn't considered a close contact, which is okay, this being a close contact, it's not a party you want to be in. So don't be upset if you don't get an invitation to the close contact party. I will say that. So if you're not considered close contact, then you just make, an announcement. It is important to have that transparency, especially too with crew who weren't a close contact but were on set, because then they still have to, at all times we're self-monitoring, but they have to be even more mindful of that self-monitoring.
Okay. OSM, I'm going to ask if we can extend our session by 15 minutes. But I promise we'll hurry.
There's no problem with that. Please continue. And we understand if people need to drop off, but this is extremely informative. So thank you.
So we're going to move on to some other topics that I think we can move through more quickly. We just wanted to go through the basics again with everybody as best we could. But before we move on, Nicole, I'm going to give you 2 minutes to talk about privacy and health privacy, please.
Yeah, so this is really, really important. And one reason why I want to mention it is because it's something that I've experienced, but also because the suggestion is that your COVID supervisor has a medical background, but not all COVID supervisors at productions do. And the reason why it's important with the medical background is because you have more of that experience with Personal Health Information Act and keeping people's information private, right? Privacy and confidentiality. So I want to mention it for those who maybe are on here who want to be a COVID supervisor or have worked as a COVID supervisor and don't have that medical background. But even for maybe smaller productions that don't have a COVID team, but have a designated person who's going to be that representative on set. Because it's very easy to accidentally give out information that is considered private and confidential without actually meaning to. And so essentially you can't share anything, even coming down to was it a he or a she, right? Because that is defining information, right? Even saying departments, right? You can't say, oh, there was a positive case in this department, but everything's been, handled. You can't say that because it's defining information, because people are then able to narrow down and find out who that is. And the idea is that you're protecting that health information of that person. It's theirs. And so you can only share that information if you get verbal or written confirmation that you can share that. Okay, so that's really, really important. So if somebody comes up to you and asks you, oh, I noticed that Sally went home yesterday and she wasn't feeling good, just wondering how is she feeling? You can't share that information. Even if you can't say, oh, actually, it's good, nothing to worry about. She was negative, it's fine. Or, oh, she's feeling really well. You can't, because that's her information. That's for her to share. So what you have to say, and sometimes it's difficult, is that, I appreciate that you are concerned, but if you are wondering how she is, I suggest you contact her yourself if you're comfortable with that, because I can't give any information out to you.
Now, apparently my puppy did not get the memo that we're extending. So I'm going to try and speak quickly and shut her up, and then turn my mic off and shut her up. Let's have a quick conversation about indoor versus outdoor shooting. So Richard, would you say it's safer to work outside, or what other things should influence our decisions when we're talking about working outdoors versus indoors?
Yeah, right. And excellent question, because you have to deal with that all the time. So my catchphrase that I use is dilution is a solution. So if you can be in a setting where you have more potential for dilution, so people aren't quite as close together, or you have better airflow, things like that, you're creating a dilution factor. And so generally that's going to be outside. But I mean, sometimes it just doesn't allow for that. And so then, sure, then you have to go inside. So you still use that same principle, except inside. So make sure that the environment is big enough. So it's at least a big hall. And so it becomes really tricky when you're shooting indoors and you have to put it into a really tight space, because that's where some of those things where Nicole says, if you don't need to be there, you're out, okay? And if potentially then the actor even then has to play a role in cleaning stuff, and so you still have to follow that dilution is a solution. So you minimize contact, and obviously if there's interviews and acting, you have, can you use a mask? Well, probably not. And so then how do you maintain that that space? Very difficult. And then that other catchphrase that I use about maintaining that perimeter. So make sure even more so that everyone has done their temp checks, and everyone is wearing that wristband. So at least if you are indoors and you're kind of ending up having to bump shoulders really closely, it's as safe as you can. But it's funny in my mind in that these are such simple concepts, and yet we seem to have difficulty again and again. But it's not actually just difficult, it's just frustrating. I think it really is. Part of it is kind of a cultural shift that has to occur, and then also the mental component of this is now being imposed on us, and we actually have no control. And that is what actually creates a lot of that internal friction as to, oh no, I can't stand this mask, I have to take it off. Yeah, because we don't have control about it. So it's very interesting. There's other factors that we haven't really touched on here at all that really can help with getting better compliance. And a lot of that is around kind of corporate culture, corporate empathy, individual empathy for each other, things like that. But I'm not going to get into that. Well, I could, but
maybe we'll have
if we go all the way till 6 o'clock, I can get into that.
But basically, and Nicole, I'm guessing you might agree with this, that when we go outdoors, like you said, we're able to dilute it, so to speak. But when we go outside and we're working, because we are still in groups, and it doesn't matter if our group is a 5-person documentary or 150-person drama crew, we are still together. So although we might have diluted it, we must still follow the same practices and patterns. Is that what you would recommend?
Yeah, exactly. Even if you're outside, you still follow those original rules on who's allowed on set. And and actually, the one other thing that I forgot for internal is one of the typical safety methodologies or frameworks is around, can we engineer stuff that's going to now create a little bit extra protection?
Yeah.
So, and I think of all the press interviews. Yeah, you've got a pole at 6 foot in your face now.
Yeah.
So things like that. I mean, but that would be indoors or outdoors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if I'm on a small documentary crew and I'm interviewing people and we're outdoors, or I see the news programs do this, I still have to think about staying 6.5 feet away from you, wear my mask when I can, don't touch your stuff, don't touch my stuff, and carry on as though I were indoors. I just have a little bit more air on my side, so to speak.
Yeah, potentially. So definitely your risk, and if you look at all the regulatory like the laws or regulations that come down in those public health orders, we recognize very clearly that your risk is lower outside, and so that's why we allow bigger groups and things like that. So at least you use that to your benefit, but it doesn't mean to say that it's zero risk.
And Nicole, something related that you were talking about earlier was, you know, I finish my day, I leave the set, I go outside all day long, I keep my mask on when I'm doing this, but somehow when the day is over, the second I walk out that door, I'm tearing my mask off. What should I really be doing?
You should be waiting until you get into your vehicle and then take it off, or as close to your vehicle as you can. If you see there's, you know, like a garbage bin or something close to your vehicle, then, you know, put it in there. What I do is I have a garbage bag that I keep kind of rolled up so that I don't have to touch anything in there. And I go in, you know, and I put my mask in there, and I have hand sanitizer in my car. And so all my masks just go into this bag in the, you know, foot part of the passenger seat. And the reason for this is that you don't know if someone's going to come up and ask you a question, right? Someone's going to ask you for directions and you don't have a mask on, and maybe they don't have a mask on either, and you have no idea who this person is, right? So the idea, and again, jumping off of what I said with, you know, keeping your PPE on as long as you can, so that you're not in these situations where you need it and you don't have it and you can't remember where you put it, right? It's just to further protect yourself. And I mean, really, if you wore it for 12 hours, what's another half an hour walk to your car?
Yeah. What's another few minutes? So maybe it's not so much a question of when do I put my mask on? It's maybe more of when can I take it off? If you just think that wearing the mask is the norm, is that correct?
Yeah, definitely. And if it's, you know, you're finding that you do need to have a break, right? Remove yourself so that you're spaced away, and, you know, take it off.
Yeah, don't go have a smoke break with your friend.
No.
You know, just don't do that. Okay,
No.
so let's talk about vaccines. So I'm going to let Richard talk mostly about this, but you know, I'd like to just say that is my understanding, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, that as an employer, you cannot compel someone to be vaccinated. You can't fire them if they won't get vaccinated. I just want to say that off the top, and maybe that gives a bit of perspective. Well, Richard, you tell us what you know and what you don't know.
Yeah, no, and that is completely correct. From the Manitoba regulations in the workplace safety and health regulations within the Act, it is very clear about that. You are not allowed to force anything, especially vaccines, upon people. But then it becomes a very interesting question, like I was talking about earlier on, about, well, so what's the corporate culture? What's the workplace culture? What is that social responsibility? And then the next question is, okay, if someone doesn't want to be vaccinated, has anyone sat down and talked to them to try and understand it in a non-judgmental way? Okay, that is imperative. It cannot have any judgment to that discussion, because then you get coercion coming in and all these sort of things. Okay, and so usually the best way is to rather say, okay, well, go and try and talk to a clinician. Some people will say the clinician is going to be biased. Okay, which I will say, yes, I would be biased, but I would try and be as non-judgmental as I possibly can and give them objective information and try and address what their real concern is. But vaccines, we're in a pandemic. I'm really sorry. So Nicole described the 5 principles, and I say that's a fist. Okay. And so far, that fist has not been quite enough, okay? So we need something else. We need that extra 1 or 2 or 3 fingers, anything extra to take us over the edge where we can get that curve to come down and stay down, okay? And so let's look at the data that's coming out of countries where they have actually now managed to vaccinate way more than what we have managed here in Canada and Manitoba. And as much as there's concern and media about all this, some people get blood clots, and some older people have anaphylaxis and all these sorts of things. We do not have a 2% death rate from vaccines. We have a 2% death rate from the virus. Do I have to say anything more to that? This is the thing, but people get worked up about that. So, but yeah, if people can get vaccinated, there are potential future benefits. So, will we have to wear a mask? Yeah, most likely for the rest of the year we will, and even though you're vaccinated. But there's already some in the US. There's already some CDC recommendations as to. So if this whole community has been vaccinated, do they have to wear masks? No, they don't. So this whole family that goes off to work and then comes back, yeah, they don't need to be worried. Okay, so there are future social benefits to getting vaccinated. The problem is with the science, we're not quite sure yet what is that number that we need to get to. So everyone talks about herd immunity. The numbers that were speculated a year ago were we had to reach 70%. If we had anything less than 70%, it'll be of no use. There's now some data that is pointing more towards 50%, but it's not going to be the same as influenza, which is around 30%. But it will be definitely kind of at close to 50% of the population needs to be vaccinated before we're going to see this real huge social benefit. And to vaccinate, you just think of the logistics of trying to vaccinate 700,000 people here in Manitoba. That's a huge job. It's going to take a long time. And so that's why we rather try and encourage everyone to be vaccinated. I'm not going to get into the details. I can partially because of time, but yeah, sorry. Obviously, clearly I'm biased.
It's quite all right. So, but that's really good information. And like I said, to reiterate, we cannot force our employees to be vaccinated. We cannot fire them because they won't. What we can compel people to do is to wear a mask. We can compel them, and this is most importantly, to follow company rules.
Yeah.
But there cannot be a company rule that says you must be vaccinated. That's all there is to it. Okay. We were going to have a couple more conversations in here, but basically I would like to sum up by we're going to go talk about the future for a couple minutes here. But basically, I just want to say that regardless of what kind of production you're on, whether you want a high budget drama, a low budget independent, a commercial, a documentary, or anything related in there, you need to do all of the things that we've talked about. You can hire a COVID team and a COVID supervisor. I wish we could talk about that more, but I don't think we can. But regardless, if you can't figure out how to hire someone to look after that for you, it all has to be done. And there somehow has to be a point person in there, because you have a responsibility for all the people who work for you. And all the people who work for you have a responsibility to follow guidelines and work with due care and caution. Okay. So just before we leave, I just want to talk a little bit about the future, and we've begun a bit. I'd like to know, how long do you think this is going to go on? Do you think there'll just be another coronavirus just like this, another pandemic in 3 years? Should we be looking at some of the practices that we've developed and make them permanent? And, you know, what kind of responsibilities do we have beyond our immediate industry and our social responsibilities in the community at large? So Nicole, why don't you take a second, and then we'll let Richard wrap it up.
I think it's so dependent, and the reason why is because it comes down to individual responsibility. And I think if we're able to, in whatever way we can, follow, you know, those 5 core principles just as a starting point, right? Our physical distancing, the hand hygiene, staying home if you're sick, or if someone in your household is sick, wearing your mask, right? Reducing any contact. That's going to dictate a lot of where things go and what happens. Sorry, what was the other half? I was really hoping that Richard was going to start this one.
I can jump in. Jump in, because this is, I've been peppered with this question multiple times. So I fully agree with you. And so how I've boiled that down to is a classic conundrum of us or me, not us or them. It's us or me. So am I the most important, and I can do what I want, and I don't care about us? And if people are caring about us, and we therefore do the right thing, we will continue to improve. But the more and more we make ourselves the most important, and we say, I don't want to wear this mask, it's not going to happen to me, then we perpetuate it. And so that is the very sad truth about it. And unfortunately, we do have good kind of epidemiological evidence about that. Here in Canada, our neighbors down south, over in England, definitely over in Europe, we've got really good data that supports that whole argument. And so I call it social responsibility. And in a pandemic, unfortunately, we have to be caring about us, about our whole film crew, not just about me. And with that, I truly hope that we have only got about a year to go then, because we've started to move forward with the vaccines. A lot more companies and people just in general, you go and walk downtown and you go onto the bus, people are wearing masks. People are actually far more compliant now compared to even just 3 months ago. Okay, so that's why I think we've started to turn that corner, and we're going to move ahead. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens in the summer, because suddenly our numbers will come down again. We've turned the corner. But you look at what happened to our second wave here in Manitoba, it took maybe a month to get up, and suddenly we were at this 15% positivity, and it took well over 3 months to get back down to that level. Okay, so that's why potentially this could take another wave, and therefore at least closer to a year before we've got enough people vaccinated, it's culturally accepted, that sort of stuff. And I mean, then unfortunately, I also, being a kind of a biologist, a medical person, I also look at medical history, and I look at the virus itself. And so the 1900s was the century of influenza. We started with Spanish flu around about this time, okay, 1918, 1919, we had Spanish flu, so influenza, massive pandemic. And now 2020, 2019, around same time, and now it's Corona. And this one we know is going to modify and continue to morph, and so does influenza. So I'm thinking that we had the century of influenza, and this coming is going to be a century of Corona. So let's go back to what happened to the world after 9/11. Things changed. There was major differences in what happened when you got into an airplane. There was way more security at border posts. Money started drifting into different directions, and this will have the same type of impact. This will have an impact on us and our children, and most likely on our grandchildren. However, we don't have to have it as the super negative impact. It just becomes this is a way of life where at the end of the day, we are looking after each other, as opposed to I am the most important person in the room.
Excellent.
Sorry, that's kind of a philosophical end, but I think that's
where
it
I think it's a brilliant point to end on. So I'd just like to thank everybody for attending. I'm very happy to have exceeded our time, but I do think we have to kind of leave it at that for today. I promise you all three of us could talk ad nauseum about this. So Nicole and OSM, we turn it back to you. Thank you.
Well, I will not keep anyone any longer either. I just want to say thank you, Ellen, thank you, Nicole, and thank you, Richard. This was very, very helpful, very informative, and leaves us also, I think, with a few new directions that we might like to pursue as we continue to develop resources for the media production industry. So we will put together the mail out as promised, and we'll continue our discussion with Ellen, Nicole, and Richard as we continue to work together to keep us all safe. Thanks, everyone, and have a wonderful evening.